Hi, everyone. Harry here to talk about the indictment of John Bolton on charges of misuse of classified or national defense information. The first point to emphasize here, while there are aspects of the reprisal prosecutions that we've seen pristine examples of with Comey and James, and that therefore were as abysmal as the DOJ has gotten. This is a different case. There are aspects of it, as I say, but we should think of it on its own rather than adulterate the clean and clear picture that Comey and James present by lumping in Bolton. Because the fact of the matter is, on the merits, on the arguments for reprisal prosecution, on just making sense of the whole chain of conduct laid out in the indictment, it is a kind of murky middle ground, even post-indictment, as I will explain. Okay, first, the basic charge. We'd been wondering if there was really anything to this. They came in and did a search, recall, just a few weeks ago of his residence and suggested this is where they were going. And it seemed to me then, and I think it was right, just implausible that a guy like Bolton, a sophisticated DC actor, would be foolish enough to have just kept in his residence a lot of classified information the way we saw Trump do in Mar-a-Lago. And indeed, that's not what the case turns out to be about. The case turns out to be about conduct of his in 2018 and 2019. He's in the first Trump administration, and he's writing a book which they bitterly opposed and tried to keep him from publishing and alleged contained improper information, but he won that battle and he published it. Now, of course, he had, when he wrote the book, the information that came out in the book and other stuff as well that presumably is more likely to have been classified or national defense information. I keep saying both just to very quick aside. While we think about classified information as being the real linchpin of what you can't mess around with, there is a separate kind of legal category. Pages aren't stamped with this, but it's the actual crime alleged, as in Mar-a-Lago, is to have improperly used national defense information. But we can consider it as pretty close to classified, though with classified, something to be aware of and that a court or jury might be influenced by, as there is a well-known tendency in the federal government to just over-classify and, stamp everything classified, even though it shouldn't be. Okay, but back to Bolton. The basic, now that the indictment emerges, it's not about anything really that they took in the search that was new, but it was they were able, and I think this is in the search. We don't exactly know yet, and it'll be one of the things that emerge in short order. But what he did that is really both baffling and very possibly criminal is not only keep a diary as he's writing a book or as just as he's serving in government, something that, as his lawyer, Abby Lowell, says, is pretty routine. A lot of people did it, but he would write notes to himself as a form of diary and share them with his wife and daughter on their unclassified systems, I think just like laptops and such. And indeed, so not only did he use these on unclassified or transmit them to unclassified systems, there was a hack by a foreign country. That's in the indictment. We don't know the specifics of it. But it looks like he did something pretty blatantly foolish. And now, of course, he did it before. And so as they're now coming after him, no way of changing it, he did himself tell the government about the hack And it looks as if all this information was known, and the Biden administration gave it a hard look, which tends to support the notion that there is a there. On the other hand, Bolton himself, as I've said, just seems like a very sophisticated actor to have done something so foolish. But some of this comes down to, is there a presumption of regularity in the Department of Justice's kind of conduct and allegations? It's that presumption that has been so terribly eroded under Trump. But it's, when you have a murky, uncertain situation, if you presume regularity, that tends to, really support what the DOJ is doing. And here, you got to say this is, as important a distinction as there is between the Bolton case on the one hand and the James and Comey cases on the other. Whereas with, as we know, and scandalously, Comey and James are actually charged in a grand jury by a complete rookie, is too experienced a word for who the U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan, just appointed in the EDVA to basically indict these guys, was she, didn't know the first thing about prosecuting, much less federal prosecuting, much less grand jury practice, and she did it. Anyway, and that, very strongly supports the notion that this is just Trump's political retribution kind of indictments. Here with Bolton, it's in a different office, the District of Maryland. It's handled by a professional 12-year veteran who has worked his way up to the position of head of the National Security Section in the District of Maryland. District of Maryland, like other places near D.C., Eastern District of Virginia, D.C. itself, tends to handle national security-related cases. And so he is in charge of them. I know him by reputation. It seems very unlikely that he would just completely throw the game the way Halligan did. On the other hand, of course, you can posit that, that big pressure from Trump and the knowledge that the president of the United States would be chuffed if you did this played a factor. And just legally speaking, I suspect practically this may matter, but legally speaking, I've mentioned again and again, as have others, that these kinds of motions for selective prosecution almost never succeed, and that Comey and James have very pristine, well documented proof that Trump basically said that they should be indicted with nothing to do with the charges. Under the law, if that's what happened to Bolton, if it was sort of up in the air and the actual cause was Trump and reprisal motives, that should be the same sort of constitutional violation. In other words, there's no requirement that selective prosecutions happen to be totally bogus. You can, for the wrong reasons, unconstitutional reasons, violation of due process reasons, order up a prosecution of the president's political enemies, and it should be just as strong. And the attorney here, by the way, for John Bolton, Abby Lowell, who also is handling Letitia James and the James case. So I think legally there may be a case there, but the fact that the charges seem to be, solid, didn't go through that politicized process, but through a really well-regarded, decently regarded career professional. The indictment itself looks like a professional DOJ indictment, not the piece of trash, the two-pager say nothing indictments that Lindsay Halligan signed for both Comey and James. So this is a different case, and it's important to note its differences, both to be fair, but also to avoid diluting the extremely strong case that exists and the facts of what happened to Comey and James, and understand the distinction here, including most importantly that it started in a different office and under a professional prosecutor. Now, Lowell, his lawyer, is going to say something like, that's still the only reason it was done. Plus, people keep a diary all the time. But man, these classified cases, and we learned this with Trump, you really gotta, play by the rules, especially because it's a wicked world where if you're a little sloppy, enemies can find out classified information. And we don't know whether this information is, super hot. There's some suggestion that some of it is pretty darn old and might not even be classified anymore. So that's part of what we need to learn. But the basic notion that you're writing a book, fine, you keep a diary, okay, and you share it with wife and daughter who don't have a classified system, and that doesn't comply with the rules and indeed is even a crime. That seems basically right to me. So there could be some problems of proof when we should see the evidence. There could be some nasty aspects that make this really basically a reprisal prosecution, but it is a really far cry from Comey and James, which were both clearly contrived. This may be one in which, the charges are bona fide, and certainly the process is bona fide in a way it wasn't with James and Comey. So we really want to see the actual kinds of information in question. Is it, of some import, even if we may not even see it the way these trials can sometimes go, but we will get a strong sense of whether it's the real deal, and probably also as to why the Biden administration took a pass. Now, there's some reason to think they weren't aware of the wife and daughter angle, which strikes me as pivotal. But anyway, all that's to come. So this is a nuanced case that is very possibly legit, and again, shouldn't take away from what the very clearly illegitimate prosecutions of Jim Comey and Letitia James. So he's already been arraigned. He already pleaded not guilty, and we'll start to see the U.S. Have to show its hand. Starting in short order, as soon as next week. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.